Welcome everyone to our first Linger Over Breakfast Zoom edition. We are glad to see so many familiar faces and some new faces with us this morning. This is a wonderful example of together we are more in action. I want to thank our founding sponsors, Avila University, and today's virtual host, St. Teresa's Academy. Additionally, I want to say a big thank you to our new sponsors, the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation and the Buchanan Initiative for Peace and Nonviolence at Avila University. Because of their generosity, today's event is complimentary. Now we'll have Sister Helen Flemington, our Kansas City Mission Advancement Advisor, to lead us in a prayer. Sister Helen?
Prayer for our earth from Pope Francis. All-powerful God, you are present in the whole universe and in the smallest of your creatures. You embrace with your tenderness all that exists. Pour out upon us the power of your love, that we may protect life and beauty. Fill us with peace, that we may live as brothers and sisters, harming no one. O God of the poor, help us to rescue the abandoned and forgotten of this earth, so precious in your eyes. Bring healing to our lives, that we may protect the world and not prey on it, that we may sow beauty, not pollution and destruction. Touch the hearts of those who look only for gain at the expense of the poor and the earth. Teach us to discover the worth of each thing, to be filled with awe and contemplation, to recognize that we are profoundly united with every creature as we journey towards your infinite light. We thank you for being with us every day. Encourage us, we pray, in our struggle for justice, love, and peace. I'm going to introduce Barbara, okay? Sister Barbara. She's had a lot of encouragement and a lot of things in her life. She spent many years at St. Teresa's Academy teaching English and religion. And they have the, then she did some work in in Kansas City, in the social justice area. And then she went to be an administrator of a parish in Kansas City, St. Joe. She has been working with many people. She's worked with many people in the ICCR, the Missouri CCR, the GI, the General CR, and it's for corporations, to challenge people in corporations so that we could challenge people, we could talk to people, we could help that. And like the coal ash in the St. Louis area and other areas there. So Barbara has still on boards, and she is working very, very busy with her work. And so Barbara, we were excited to hear what you're going to say.
Let's see.
I think I unmuted.
You did, yes.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. And it's just great to hear that the wonderful sponsors of this event also. So this morning we're talking about Laudato Si and the socially responsible investment work that has been very important to the CSJ since the late 1970s, which I will go into in a few minutes. But this morning, what are we asking ourselves? How have we changed since the 5 years ago that Pope Francis wrote Laudato Si? And I'm hoping that everyone at least breathes through the document again for this presentation. But the question is, and I'm so happy to see that Barbara sent out those, the 51 ways to be socially and environmentally responsible, because those were great actions, thoughts that we could take. But the question is, how have we changed over the last 5 years? How has the Pope helped us to change? Actually, one of the answers is the Pope has brought to the globe what Catholic social teaching is all about and has been about the last 120 years since the late 1800s. So let's just go through some of these topics that I picked out as sort of the important ones. The integral ecology that I think Pope Francis really put together for all of us. And what does that mean? Nature, care for the poor, commitment to conversion, commitment to changing our social actions, how we govern ourselves, and of course, how we care for the earth. All of that is one piece. It's not separated. And this is one of the things about working with investments and working with corporations that I have learned over the years, and also teaching at Avila and Fonfon in the evening courses, that businesses do recognize their responsibilities. After 5 years of this document, after many, many investors have put on the pressure to corporations, that they are beginning to really get it, that we don't live in a vacuum. Human life, our natural environment, everything must work together or we deteriorate together. I'm sure that you can think of all of the natural disasters that have happened in the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years. The floods, the fires, all because of deforestation, lack of wetlands, lack of care for our environment that has been going on for many, many years, especially here in the United States, but all over the world. So we either work together and make a difference, or we are deteriorating together. And this is what Pope Francis so well recognized for us. Another very unhappy thought that we have to look at is the myth of our unlimited human progress. We are not meant to be the top dogs in this world. We are meant to be part of creation, part of what God gave us. And we are meant to take care of this earth. And we are not meant to be the ones who use up the earth. So everything is necessary to our common home. The couple of illustrations that I'm going to give throughout this presentation of these ideas is, one is our food system. The other one is our plastics system, which I'm sure most of you are very aware of. Our food system is one of the reasons why we are lacking, where our climate is changing, why our health is not good, why we are changing the world around us. And here we are in the Midwest, the center of the food system of our country, with corn and soybeans and lots of pesticides, herbicides, etc., making our environment not being able to absorb the carbon, making our water more dirty, more polluted. We're getting rid of our pollinators, which has become a very great problem for people in California who are growing our almonds, our peaches, et cetera, et cetera. So all of this is so connected. Our food system is based on our overconsumption of meat. Tyson, Hormel, these companies would be working differently if we were not consuming as much, if we were using a more plant-based diet. Meat itself, cattle, cows, add to the methane in our environment. So here we are in the Midwest, we're full of methane, we're full of carbon, and this is a very embedded system that we're in now. And the questions are then, how are we going to change ourselves because of this? Another, I think, prophetic term that Pope Francis used in the 124th paragraph or section in Laudato Si is the concept of a just transition. This has been an important issue for investors also at ICCR and here in St. Louis, here with our work. So just transition means, what about the workers who are in these fields of work? What about those who work in our meat packing plants here in Missouri, northern Missouri, southern Missouri? What about our farmers? What about the coal mining that is disappearing in our country, which is a good thing, but what about those who are being let off of their jobs? What about wages for those who work in these meatpacking companies, drilling? What about solar, which has also taken some hold here in Missouri, northern Missouri specifically? What about those workers and their job security, wages, etc.? What about those whose lands are being bought to put in solar energy? All of these questions we as shareholders can ask corporations how they are treating their workers, how are they looking ahead at employment issues. So the good news is that investors are also looking at the concept of greenwashing. How many of you have heard of greenwashing? I hope everybody could raise your hand if you know what that is. So corporations are beginning to realize that they have to have specific goals and steps in mind to take care of these issues. Again, because of Pope Francis putting all of this together, looking at integral ecology. Some examples that I can bring out here of the leading companies are actually Dow Chemicals is beginning to look at their misuse of water and how they can create our chemicals with less water, less pollution. Clothing companies like Gap and Adidas, etc., are beginning to look at how their use of water and air has polluted. And you may ask yourself, well, how does making clothing pollute water? the answer is, that I learned doing this work, is that the clothes that are made in countries like Bangladesh, China, are, especially jeans, but many other clothes, need a lot of water for the making of the fiber. So when you buy your next pair of jeans, look at where it was made and ask yourself, who did this work? That we can see that in Bangladesh and in China, the working conditions are very, very bad for those mostly men and young boys who are, they soak the jeans in water with all these chemicals, and they themselves have to go in the pit of water like a big pool, and they're in there with all these chemicals, and most of the time they have burns and itching and allergies to these mixtures. So these are things that most of us don't even think about. I would guess, at least I did not think about it that much. So we are one world, and this is what we thank Pope Francis for bringing that out to us even more. And I also want to make sure that you put your questions in the chat box so that we can have some time for questions. So the next slide, please. What about, again, Laudato Si and investments? Going back to Catholic social teaching, which deals with charity and justice. The origins of Catholic social teaching actually do have to do with justice. Back in the late 1890s, when some attorneys and other people from the Catholic Church went to Pope Leo XIII and said, look how you are losing the working class people because you are not speaking out about the conditions in factories. And they were mostly talking about factories in England and France and the European areas. So this is how Catholic social teaching began. Pope Leo wrote his encyclical on the conditions of work. So in Catholic social teaching, we look at charity, helping people in the immediate situation. Most illustrative right here at Carondelet, this past week, we asked for donations for our sisters who are in El Paso right now, that they could bring Pedialyte and clothing and medicines down to the border to work with the families at Annunciation House. Well, the whole garage over at here at Carondelet is full of items. Most of those will now be taken down by the Archdiocese, and their van was full. So this is a great example of charity. People are usually so responsive to charity, right? We look at those children down there and say, you know, we need to help them. We need to help them with our generosity, and that's wonderful. But justice is helping people through the systems of change. Why are those people poor? Why are those countries misused? And their environments are being ruined also. Why? And what can we do about it? So most of the time we look at legislation, we look at corporations, and we ought to be looking at our own investments in those corporations, such as where, again, climate change, our supply of food and chemicals. The USCCB, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, did write out guidelines in 2003 for investors connected to the Catholic Church. And those are still available online. on their website. Pope Francis wanted to acknowledge the appeal, the immensity, and the urgency of this challenge. He wants to go beyond charity and giving. So this is, again, it's such a great awareness tool for us. Another important feature of this investment issue is careers, finance, global studies. Our students who are now in high schools and colleges, even in grade schools, can prepare for this work. That corporations are now hiring young people out of college to work in their corporate social responsibility offices, racial justice office, diversity is a big new interest now in corporations. And a lot of that is because of popular demand and also investor demand. So those of us who are in education, I urge you to help our students to know that these jobs are now very available to young people. And those are the skills that they could be looking at today in order to do this work. And then finally, there's no such thing in my mind as an innocent stockholder. He may be innocent in fact, but socially he cannot be held innocent. He accepts the benefits of the system. It is his business and his obligation to see that those who represent him carry out a policy which is consistent with the public welfare. Louis Brandeis was an investment himself, a financier, and a Jewish person in the late 1800s. And so very prophetic to this issue. All right, next slide, please. How did this whole movement begin? And you can find some of this on the ICCR website, but just as a little elementary history here, that in the late 70s, faith-based investors engaged Shell, Polaroid, companies that were mostly US. Shell is a Dutch company, but these companies were all located in South Africa with their executive offices and factories. The problem was they were not hiring native peoples of South Africa. And so faith-based investors, mostly Catholic, Jewish, and Protestants, and some from faith-based investment companies went to South Africa and talked to the corporate leaders there, as well as here in the United States. And they said, if you don't change your hiring policies, your education policies, you will have social unrest. So we all know, most of us know, that that did happen. And along with the social unrest came global boycotts and protests. I can still remember boycotting Coca-Cola here in the United States. We stopped buying Coca-Cola. I don't know if we stopped buying Fords, but we were protesting. Also in front of the United Nations, I believe there were daily protests regarding these corporations in South Africa. Eventually, they did change their hiring habits, their education habits. They became more philanthropic for the people of the areas. Mostly of these were, of course, in Johannesburg. Well, the investors decided that this was working out pretty well. So they said, let's go into diverse causes. Let's work together more. And ICCR was cemented in place as a group of interested investors who then quickly went into diverse causes. And so today we do have environment, social, and governance issues, which really took hold in the 2010s and into today. So mainstream investors are picking up these issues. Large groups of investors, even BlackRock, Vanguard, are leading the way. And BlackRock, which I'll mention later, is one of the greatest investors of our times. And then in the world, in 2000s, Laudato Si, the Pope met with many CEOs of corporations, and the expansion of the issues became more specific as far as greenhouse gas emissions, water and food, social issues, human rights, free, prior, informed consent, which is something that can be measured by corporations, especially oil and seed companies who go into a country with, many of them have gone into countries without asking the native peoples about their positions there and how they can be helped, how they are actually asked what they want to do with this corporation in their midst. The best illustration that I have for that is at ICCR, we had met with ConocoPhillips many times, who showed us how when they are pursuing a company or drilling, let's say in Brazil, they sat with the people in their language. They worked with the people, with the tribes, not just with the leaders of the tribes. They explained how long their work would be there, how they would leave if they could not find oil. But in the meantime, they would be hiring the women to prepare their meals, the men to do the work, and that they would pay them a living wage in that country. So this is, again, an example of specifics, what we're looking for when companies say, oh, we really do care about our workers and our people. Well, let's give us some real examples here. And finally, governance issues like lobbying, political spending, and boards. Many ICCR members have asked about lobbying, how companies lobby through their trade associations, through their political spending, etc. This has been a very big problem since the Supreme Court and Citizens United, but we're still working with those corporations to help them to be more honest about how much they give to their trade association, which in turn lobbies our governments. So, and having boards with expertise, for instance, a very popular movement with investors is to ask the board if they have someone with climate expertise, with science expertise, with human resources expertise. So that would be an example of that. And careers, did I mention careers for young people? Again, to help our young people look at this as a great work that they could participate. Let's see. Okay, who's in ICCR? Thank you, Jeff, for changing. Jeff, please change the, there you go. So now ICCR is 370 institutional faith-based members, Christian, Jewish, Islamic. Most of these are from their pension funds, endowment funds, etc. The Catholic women and men's religious communities have been in this from the beginning. The Jesuits, the CSJs, many endowment funds at our schools, which we'll hear more about. And here in St. Louis, from the 1970s on, the the Lorettos, the Notre Dames, and ourselves were part of forming our local group here in St. Louis, the Midwest Coalition. Then we, just a couple years ago, joined a similar group in Milwaukee. Now, again, pension funds, denomination and state pension funds are a big part of ICCR. California Pension Fund, New York Pension Fund, and many, many foundations. The Rockefeller Foundation is one that you would recognize, are all members, all attend the meetings, all are active in the shareholder work. And I've listed some there too. Boston Common, Walden, Zevin. Zevin Asset Management is very, very involved now in racial justice issues, hiring, education, how corporations incorporate people of color, people of diverse sexual orientations, etc. Greystone, which is part of Morgan Stanley, one of the big investments companies. And then we have two local here, Viagen and J.A. Glenn, who have been very, very active. I don't know if there's any particular trusted investment companies in Kansas City. That might be something some of you could know about and put in the chat box for a little advertisement. Universities have gotten involved somewhat, but especially through historical working through the sisters, Avila and Fontbonne. And then, of course, hospital systems have gotten even more involved. Mercy Investment is the greatest example there of starting their own investment services, which is very well funded and has a large staff. I think it's about 5 women on Mercy Investment Services. They're very, very active in ICCR. All right, next slide, please. So how do we work? Well, our value is dialogue over debate. We ask questions, we seek the facts, we listen to answers. We do a lot of research. We ask the companies to do something that's doable, ethical, and to mitigate their risk. We study their corporate social responsibilities report, their 10Ks, etc. And global scorecards have also become a great tool for us for being able to compare companies in the environmental work, or for instance, in carbon emissions, water pollution, working conditions. These are global scorecards, and these are other groups that do this research through the United Nations, through the Principles of Responsible Investment, PRI, which is a global nonprofit. So these have been very helpful, because when you go to a company for dialogue, it's nice to ask them why they're so far behind in their emissions of greenhouse gases. Why is Kansas City Power and Light, which I think now has another name, why are they on top of the first 10 when our company here in St. Louis is down to number 48 as far as carbon emissions? So you can kind of be proud of Kansas City Power and Light over there. But it's good to have the facts. If the company is not moving forward and not presenting us with something that they can actually do to mitigate this risk, whether it's labor unrest, whether it's carbon, whether it's water pollution, whether it's lack of racial diversity, if they are not moving forward with real facts, then we can write a shareholder proposal or resolution. And this goes to the company, it goes to the SEC. It has to be less than 500 words. It has to be filed by a certain date. It has to have the best research possible, because we want the shareholders to vote for us, with us, when it comes to a vote at the company. If there is a large vote, usually 20% of the vote, the company will actually move forward, because that's a large vote by shareholders. Back in 2018, we got a 53% vote at Ameren over our coal ash issue. That has been, the company then had to hire an independent engineer to look at their coal ash disposal in the middle of the Missouri River and the Mississippi River, which we said, wait a minute, you can't do this. You can't just leave all this yucky pollution and metals and toxic stuff that's going to run down our rivers into our farmlands and cause further pollution. And so they hired an independent engineer, which I would put independent in quotation marks, because the head of that company is a woman who actually said that children could eat coal ash in their backyard without getting sick. And we know for sure. We worked with Washington University Environmental Law School on all of this. And the company did hire this engineer, and they said that they did find some problems with coal ash pollution in people's farms and backyards. And so they promised to do linings and to move most of the coal ash on to ground waste sites rather than next to our within our rivers. So that's one thing. And if you looked at the ICCR report, you can see that in 2020, 9 companies got over 50% of the vote on these are on environmental issues. 15 companies were gifted with a 40% vote. And so these are considered mandates for these companies to look at these issues. The entity that files the resolution then can go back to the company in 6 months and say, what have you done? We want to see it. They have to prepare a report for those shareholders to fulfill the work of the resolution. All right, so then if companies are not doing what we have asked them to do, they can divest. And we have not divested of any companies here in St. Louis, but some ICCR members or MICRE, which is now the Socially Responsible Investment Group in Milwaukee, have divested. One of the big issues in the past, which some of us might remember, was tobacco. This was one of the first of the social issues that ICCR members took on. And eventually those companies had to change. Some just divested of tobacco. Tobacco lost a lot of people when finally the government said, yes, it is harmful to your health and children should not be smoking, those kinds of issues. So coal right now is the new tobacco. Many companies have divested of coal. And mostly that's also a economic issue, because coal has lost its economic superiority over the last probably 6-7 years, because of renewables coming in stronger. All right, next slide. All right, so why do they talk to us? Well, number one, we are shareholders. We do our homework. We are the nuns. even though we bring some men with us from the men's communities, the Jesuits and the Marianists, and we had some other male members who wanted to join with us. And but they realized that they can also save dollars with better ESG practices, with fewer financial and reputational risk, and that employees are better motivated because they recognize that their company is doing the right thing. So, and a better reputation. So again, to go back to the Ameren example, that there was a lot of coverage here in St. Louis on our radio stations and also on the newspapers about the vote that we got in 2018, the 53%. It was in the Springfield, Illinois paper. It was here in St. Louis. It was on the news. And of course, companies do not like any kind of negative PR. So this was very well covered. We had a good time with that. And so another reason that companies talk to us is that more and more investment managers, large investment managers, are developing products in ESG. Today, there are trillions of dollars that are specifically invested in ESG corporations who are proving that they are actually doing the work. Now, I haven't talked too much yet about negative screens and positive screens. And I'm going to let Ron Scalipizza from Avila and Sister Rose from Fonfon talk from St. Teresa's Investment Committee to talk about your work with negative screens and with positive screens if you are doing that now.
I'll start. And yes, in negative screens, we will, well, first of all, we made a decision about 14 years ago that we will do well by doing good. And that was, we chose to preference local investment managers and local trustees in the Kansas City area who were performing in the top quintile of their asset classes. And that gave us the ability to not go with these huge funds, but to be able to work with funds and have them exclude, when it violated screens that we had, certain groups from that. And but the other thought would be, if we're supporting Kansas City wherever we can, it's going to bring benefit to the institution. And so the screens are, war and tobacco and birth control and abortion and pornography and alcohol and gambling and some things like that. And the threshold is 25%. 25% of the company's revenue in one or combined would cause us to make a change. But you mentioned something, and I want to give you an example of how the company is doing. KCP&L is a strong company in trying to be more responsible. But one of the ways they do it, and one of the ways that we've taken advantage of it, is when we invest in more energy efficient electricity, they offer rebates, and they offer rebates of almost to the cost of the investment. So, for example, we've converted many of our electrical sources to lights that are much more efficient, and to air handling systems that are more efficient. And that benefits us because it lowers our utility bills, but it benefits them because it puts them in a position to be better in terms of responsibility to the community. One of the things that's negative in recent years is that many people in the Kansas City area saw their gas bills go up in the month of February by 20 times the amount that it went up in prior years, 20 times in 1 month. To give you an example, that month of February for the whole university, a year ago was 7,300,000, and this year it's $126,000 for 1 month of gas. Most families can't live with that and can't pay for that. And that was because investors chose to invest in that market, and they drove up the cost at a point where it did not help the communities that in which they live. And so there's a question of, how are we sometimes our own worst enemies in that? And so what I would say is that those investments that are primarily in our endowment help us to provide scholarships, which are absolutely necessary to the 43% of our student body who are low income and or first generation students and students who are diverse. And so as we do well and grow that endowment, which when I came was $6 million and is now a little over 17 and a half, it helps us to be more effective in serving the people that we're called to serve, those who have the greatest need. But it is a balancing act. And one of the things that benefited us is a foundation that said, if you take no draw from your endowment for 5 years, we'll match half of that draw each year, provided you can raise the other half. And so that was a hard thing to do, but that enabled our endowment to just about double over 5 years. So it is this balancing act of how do you serve the students you're called to serve, who are tremendously in need of financial support, and how do you leverage that endowment to get as much as it can. And in our case, over that same time, we reduced our tuition by 1/3, which made that gap and the amount of scholarship we need to raise versus discount a much more manageable one. So it's a multiple push and pull at the same time that you want to educate your students about what does it mean to be a responsible steward? What does it mean to be able to promote development in the world? And what does it mean to be able to fight pollution and the things that are causing us as a society in this spaceship Earth, moving through space and time to be able to sustain ourselves as we move through that space and time.
Thank you, Ron. That's very, very, very helpful information. Thank you. Okay, Sister Rose.
St. Teresa Academy is utilizing the same screens that the province has used in their investment portfolio. And they're pretty much what Ron was talking about in terms of negative screens from gambling, predatory lending, abortion, other things like that. We also now are looking at structural issues. And so we have a subcommittee now of our finance committee, and it's an investment committee, so that we can do more focusing on our investments, where they are, how they're doing, and more communication between the institution and the investment managers. Our primary investment manager has a grouping within their investments that's called socially responsible investment. So that's a real advantage. They're aware of this, they're on top of it, and they utilize it. The other issue that has come up that's a structural issue is one of our former board members challenged us to invest, have one of our investment managers be a Black-owned investment manager group. And so we're doing research on that, and we'll be bringing that to our investment committee. As Ron pointed out, this is really multi-issue. One example is having the solar panels now on some of our buildings. The students use that for some of their class projects and studying, math issues and all kinds of things. So they're looking at that, tracking it, and utilizing that information in their education. So that's another way that all of this can be integrated into our purposes.
Okay, thank you very much, Rose. That was helpful. And I will just mention that with Fonpon, we also have the threshold of the negative investors. I think ours is 5%. So an example would be Johnson & Johnson, that our managers can buy Johnson & Johnson because less than 5% of their manufacture is birth control or abortifacients. So this is just to give you an idea of our negative screens. And then our positive screens are, as what Rose was sort of talking about there, is what are we doing to hire diversity in our managers? What are we doing to look at our other aspects, environmental, etc. For instance, also at Fonpon, we added one more negative that we would not buy into corporations that had suspicious human trafficking business in their portfolio. So some of the computer companies, some of the search engines and that sort of thing are being looked at for evidence of human trafficking. Okay, I think, Jeff, the next slide, please. All right, so I think we're at the time for questions and we only have 1 minute left. So can we hear what some of those questions are in the chat? Let's see. Yes, corporations do make products that people demand, meat, clothing, and we do need to change ourselves to change the world. We have to look at our demand. If we demand more of the non-meat-based protein, we would have a different supply chain. Okay. Ave Maria funds give us ordinary Catholics a way to invest in corporations whose work is not in conflict. Yes, we have used those funds, I'm sure, in the past. Okay. Oh, what does greenwashing mean? Greenwashing means very, very general statements that corporations like to make. One of the most favorite ones I have is, an example is, our company takes seriously our effect on the environment, and we are working to mitigate our risk in those areas and to work with other companies, to work with nonprofits about these risks to our society. But they don't have any specifics to give. They don't have any goals yet. They don't have any targets. They don't say, okay, by 2030, we're going to be down to 20% use of electricity, coal-fired electricity. They have not looked at their supply chain for how much their supply chain is using. They have not looked at their risk, even for human trafficking down their supply chain. An example of that is when we started working with Boeing on their supply chain, we found out that they had no idea that the minerals that they need for their electric, all the electricity in their cockpits, the cobalt, etc. They had no idea that these could be human slavery issues in Africa, mining places of cobalt, titanium, etc. And those products are very much needed for electronics, cell phones, also for the panels in every airplane that is flown. So they hired a company to begin to go down their supply chain for these kinds of misuses. So I look forward to any of your other questions. Thank you again for participating and for giving us an idea of how we can look at our investments. And I would mainly ask you is, when you go to buy something, look at the label, look at where it's made, ask questions, and look at your investments. I will be sending out a list of trusted investment managers who are members of ICCR, and hopefully you can also, and I'll find out some from Kansas City also that would to add to that list. All right, thank you, Barbara.
Thank you so much, sister, for doing this and for our inaugural Zoom event on this. And thank you everyone for attending this event. We have been doing these for so long, and it's nice to be able to have a different avenue to present these events. I want also for you to write down and look forward to May 1st, 2 weeks from today. We will be having another Linger Over Breakfast event. It is our rescheduled one from last October. It's our follow-up on our Sisters of Selma, Dismantling Discrimination, a panel discussion. We'll be live streaming that, so you can register online at csjsl.org. And we have a panel of civic and business and educational leaders talking and visiting with us how we can advance the mission to dismantle discrimination. It's still, unfortunately, it's still a huge topic that's going on, but we want to be part of the solution to this. So we look forward to everyone coming and attending that as well. Thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you in the future, and also check our website for the rest of Sister Barbara's links. Thank you. And now, Sister Helen, will you lead us in a closing prayer?
All-powerful God, you are present in the whole universe and in the smallest of your creatures. You embrace with your tenderness all that exists. Pour out upon us the power of your love, that we may protect life and beauty. Fill us with peace, that we may live as brothers and sisters, harming no one. O God of the poor, help us to rescue the abandoned and forgotten of this earth, so precious in your eyes. Bring healing to our lives, that we may protect the world and not prey on it, that we may sow beauty, not pollution and destruction. Touch the hearts of those who look only for gain at the expense of the poor and the earth. Teach us to discover the worth of each thing, to be filled with awe and contemplation, to recognize that we are profoundly united with every creature as we journey towards your infinite light. We thank you for being with us each day. Encourage us, we pray, in our struggle for justice, love, and peace.